In this module, we're going to talk about Express.js. And to install Express, we just need to use npm, and this will bring the Express package into our application. Express is minimal. It will allow you to build out some web APIs as well as launch your web server. Once we install this, if we look at the package.json, we'll see it's a dependency now. And the node modules now, if you inspect them, you'll see that Express has been installed and all its dependencies. We want to expose our watch list module. Ideally, we're not going to trigger it in this fashion. This is kind of a manual fashion of triggering code. So we are going to delete this right now or toggle this out. What we want to do is we want to use Express to kick off our web server. So we want Node to act as a web server and take HTTP requests. So the boilerplate node that they give you is kind of convoluted. This is very simple once you use Express to kick off a little app server, and we can do it in 10 lines of code. So we want to import in or require the Express package, create an instance of this Express, and create a new instance of Express. Once we have this Express app, we can go ahead and start it. So we'll create a port. Now this is going to be the preferred port that we would like this to run on. For right now, we'll say 3000. The node monitoring tool allows hot reloading, so we don't have to keep restarting and stopping our code as we would with the node command at the command line. So node mon allows us to run the monitoring tool. So back in the app here, we're going to kick off our server app.listen. We're going to configure it to run a specific port, and we're going to give it a simple callback here just to let us know that the server is actually running. We don't need this, but without the callback, sometimes you won't actually get that little feedback that the server is in fact up and running in the console. So this is just a quick little thing to let us know the server started on port 3000. And there's no UI here. It's just kicked off. So we don't really have a UI to work with yet. We need to provide the port. That was probably our problem. So we need to actually kick off Express. We need to tell it which port we would like it to run on. Otherwise, it may default whichever available port it could pick up. So we'll go back to our 3000 here and refresh. We're getting a different response, which is good. It's actually returning a payload, but we need to improve this, obviously. Right now, the browser by default does a GET request. So right now it's telling us there is no GET request handler. So we need to create a couple handlers here at least. So we can define our routes really easy using Express. We can go app.get and give it the root path / that's like the default path. Otherwise, we could define our routes. So we could say when somebody calls / localhost 3000, if that's our server / watch list on a GET request, Express is going to handle this route and deal with the response. Now we could just quickly return a response here. But what's interesting about Express is it'll always give you two parameters, the request, REQ, and the response, RES. They can be named anything you want, but those give those two objects, and then we can actually inspect the request, inspect the response, respond back, and kind of finalize that communication path. So right now we're just going to console log out that the watch list has been fired and the GET request has been captured. But we need to terminate the request. So on the response, we need to end or send something back, but we need to terminate that handshake. So here we're going to do response.end. And then when we go to this page here, /watchlist route, we'll see nothing in our page because we're using our page to trigger this. And it's true, we're not actually sending any data back or any message back. So here is where we could actually send a little payload back if we wanted to test this out. We could say watch list received, and this would come from the server. Instead of terminating the request with an end, we'll send some data back. If we inspect the dev tools in the network tab here, and we refresh this page, you'll see the GET request come in here, and then you'll see it's a 304. If we inspect this, and we look at the response, you'll see the payload is there. In the general tab, we'll see that it's green. It was a GET request. It succeeded without error. So we have a little bit of a communication very easily set up. So what we would want to do is we already built a module for get items. All we'd like to do is just return back. We would like to call into our custom modules, get our watch list items, and return it back via Express in the response. The really great thing about Express is it's going to handle that conversion for us. So instead of sending back a message now, we'll send back the payload. We go back to our browser here. You'll see an empty payload, but a little bit of a different request here. So we have to change this out a little bit here. If we default some data in here just to show it was actually working, but we didn't have any data. So if we refresh here, we'll see that. And if we inspect our network tab here, we can see in the response, now we have content is JSON format. And if we inspect this a little bit better, we'll see it's an array. So we're manipulating it manually, but what we'd like to do is build out a couple endpoints so that we can add and then fetch, possibly remove. In the same pattern, we might want to create a way to add a symbol, but this time we're going to use the post verb in REST. So in RESTful interfaces, we have verbs and actions. So get, post, delete, those types of things signal what we would like to do on this same route, because all the routes will be watch list, but the difference is the verb or action that we're sending back. So when we do a get, we're saying we'd like to fetch. When we're posting, usually that means we're either adding or we're updating something to the server. We're trying to persist data. So by signaling post, we can basically start to build out a little bit of a dictionary of routes. And this is all about what RESTful APIs are about. So we're just going to, again, console log out quickly. The difference is we can't post now in the browser. The browser by default does GET requests, but we cannot post directly. In order to test APIs out a little bit more thoroughly, there's this tool, one tool that's good to use is called Postman. Go to Postman and we download this tool. This is not a browser application. This is a desktop app that we can run. So you go and download that out, and it looks like this when you launch it. It's a little app that basically we can talk to the server in isolation, test our API endpoints, and inspect the data. So we're basically separating out the server from the front end right now. So we can see here we're interacting, we're doing a GET request, we're seeing our default data there. Now we're going to post. Now the difference is we need to go back and fill this out. We need to get that callback with the request and the response defined, and then we can terminate the response correctly. We can rename this explicitly request and response, or we can keep it short formed. We can name it anything we want, to be honest, but the pattern usually is either request or response or REQ and RES. So now that we post again, we should see post received. What we would like to do is we'd like to pass a parameter back. So we'd like to give a symbol and a value so that we can pass that back through the API to the server, and then our node module will add this to our cached data array. So here the parameter will exist on the request because that is how you're sending it. You're triggering this mechanism via the request. So in the latest version of Node that we installed, now on the request is the parameters, and we can actually pull out the key value pair. So by using destructuring, we can pull out the symbol from the request parameters, the request REQ params. Latest versions have made it very easy to do this. We don't need any middleware or any little packages to install to help us. In the past, we needed a package called body parser that would parse the body of the request. The current 2024 version of Express, it's all built in so that you can easily just pull out parameters. We're going to echo back the request.params directly and see what the payload looks like. Our problem is this is the step that we missed. We need to set up our middleware. So Express allows us to configure it. So we can configure Express out of the box. We need to configure some middleware. so that Express knows what we'd like to import when we're using the library. The updated Express, the latest version, uses request.query. So request.query is where all the parameters will live. So you have to remember when you're doing this work, you have to look at the documentation. So now you'll see we can pass back some values and it's being pretty dynamic. So request.query is the latest update to the API. So we have a way to get the routes and we have a way to persist. So next we need to do the same pattern and we need to actually remove an item from the list. So with our get request, we fetched. With our post request, we're adding. And we're going to use another verb because we'd like to remove from the watch list. So now that we have the item, now we can actually use our custom module. So we have that method watchlist module.add item, and we can actually now pass it back and manage our cached data array that we have in that module. So now we have a way of persisting this. Post, if we play with our watchman here, you'll see we'll make the first get request. We'll pull back that empty list. We'll adjust this to pull back the empty list. So we'll start fresh. It'll be an empty list here. Now we'll go ahead and we'll add a value. So now it says post request BDC. We'll update it. We'll see that it's persisting. We'll go back. We'll add another one. We'll add Ethereum. We'll kick off a request for posting. And then we'll go back and we'll check that the data is loading up. So this is all working actually. We have the API with a custom module. But we need one more mechanism. We'd like to remove data. We don't have to send back a message anymore since we know this is working. We can just send back an empty response and Express will actually, as long as the request has been successful, Express will return back that 200 or 300 code that lets the caller know that everything is successful. So if we trigger this without a message and we go back to our watch list here, you can see we'll add another one here. We'll add Cordano. And you can see the 200 here. You can see in Postman, it'll give you a little status update of the code that came back. So you can see status 200 OK. So it looks like our endpoints are working here. We have 3 items. We're adding to them. We have a fetch mechanism. The difference between response.send is that it will give back a status, but if we do response.end versus send, this will terminate our session and we lose our temp data. Right there, if you saw it, we actually lost the cache. So we want to keep the session alive. So we're going to use send over end. We need a database eventually to persist our data, and that's up next.